it's also why, in my perspective, why so many of us, inclusive of myself, are control freaks around everything, because that helps us have this illusion that we're in control, and that helps us feel more certain in the uncertain environment. And for me, I'm really sitting and cultivating and watering this perspective of, wow, how do I continue to notice that my next breath isn't guaranteed, my next heartbeat isn't guaranteed, my tomorrow isn't guaranteed, that what is guaranteed, as far as I can tell, is I'm on this podcast with you at this moment. And can I allow the grandeur and the beauty of that moment to really sink in and enjoy it, as well as feel all of the feelings and emotions that come with it, and to slowly practice getting myself comfortable with the idea that I'm not in control.
FC2O. From chaos to order. From chaos to order. Here we go. From chaos to order. From chaos to order. FC2O.
Today we have Jator Pierre at your humble service. Jator has been a friend and colleague of mine for many years now, as our paths crossed in training at the Czech Institute and then as fellow faculty members too. Jator is a highly skilled, competent and successful coach, running his coaching business primarily online at explorewithjator.com. As well as his training at the Czech Institute, Jator is a Kresser mentor with the Chris Kresser Institute and has done extensive training with John McMullen at Journeys of Wisdom. Jator's true passion is the exploration of emotional healing, which allows him to help his clients and students find the keys to unlock positive change in their lives. With regular rave reviews for his delivery of the Czech Institute's Holistic Lifestyle Coach program, Jator is someone who has that rare combination of exceptional skill in sharing both his knowledge and his wisdom from his head and his heart. I'm feeling quite confident that you'll love imbibing the wisdom that spills out during this next FC2O dialogue. Enjoy the show. Here we go. Jator Pierre, welcome to FC2O.
Matt Wallden.
I caught you with a mouthful of water there.
Yeah.
Brilliant. I hope you were chewing your water there. Were you chewing it?
No, I only swallow my water.
Do you? Okay.
I
Yeah.
typically chew my food, but my water I either just swallow or spit out on people.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, fair enough. You know, each to their own. So Jator, you and I have known each other a few years now. I was actually just thinking earlier today, because we met on the CP3, didn't we? So this is the third level, or actually it was the fourth level. It was a trick name. But the Czech level 3 was actually level 4. But anyway, we met there. Was it 2012 or 2010? Somewhere in that kind of neck of the woods.
It was your first CP3. So.
It was. Yeah. And
I think my favorite part of the whole class, outside of, wow, that class is intense.
Yeah.
My favorite part is you had us go around and introduce ourselves, and it got to me, and I said, yeah, I'm not here for any of the assessments. I'm here to get to level 4.
Brilliant. That's a genius response.
Because I couldn't memorize those 270 some odd assessments.
Yeah, there's quite a few. Yeah. It is an intense course, but quite fun. A lot of camaraderie in that environment. I remember a lot of espresso being drunken.
Yeah, it was really fun and profound. That class is.
Yeah.
To sit in and just experience that class, in all honesty, I'd say that class was so amazing to tying so many things together and having a better understanding of the contextual organization of the human being. It's a profound class for sure.
Yeah. Awesome. So what was it that had got you into the Czech approach? We go back before your sort of journey through the Czech training. Where had you started out? What was it that led you there?
Yeah, I started as a personal trainer at 24 Hour Fitness, and my fitness manager was a Czechie, and that was my first introduction to the Czech work. And at the time, I wasn't really attracted to it. I wasn't attracted to it, to be honest. And then went to school for kinesiology and nutrition at university. And then I was sitting at work reading an article on some personal training website, and Paul's articles, I believe they were called "You Are What You Eat." I believe there's 3 of them popped up, and everything he was talking about was essentially the polar opposite of what I had just learned in university, specifically around nutrition. And I thought, that's really interesting. And that started my dive into the Czech Institute. And after that, I was really drawn towards more so of the holistic lifestyle coaching side than I was the practitioner side. I grew up in a kind of a more Eastern philosophy home. And so a lot of what Paul was speaking, I'd heard seeds of when I was a kid, and spoke to me and was very attractive to me. And after going to university and having CSCS and worked at the Raiders and all these high level certifications, and still noticing that there was a lot of challenges that weren't being addressed even with that level of knowledge. The kind of the underpinnings, we look at those 6 principles, the one that Paul at the top there, the thoughts, that started to really spark my interest greatly.
Right.
And then as I was continuing, I'm a person that learns tremendously well by having a mentor. That's probably the easiest way for me to learn. And so I was looking at the Czech faculty and thinking at the time, who kind of represented what I wanted to do as a Czech practitioner. And JP was that person. And hired JP. And through that process, became extremely close friends with him. And that deep dive in our friendship kind of blossomed what I do today, and my
Fantastic.
work and perspective today. And it continues to grow.
Yeah, and some of your cameo roles in his videos as well. Fantastic.
Yeah, lots of cameos.
Excellent. So you mentioned the 6 foundation health principles, which I know obviously the Czechies that are listening will understand what that is. But for those that are unfamiliar, one of the things we teach in the holistic lifestyle coaching is that there's these 6 foundation health principles, and the first is to think right, but then we've also got to drink right, to sleep right, to eat right, to move right, and breathe right. Yeah, that's the 6 of them. And so it's, we kind of say, look, health is super simple, and in a way, it's disease that's complex. And I've always felt that when we teach the holistic lifestyle coaching, that the simplicity that's inherent within that teaching, but also within health itself, is almost so simple it's difficult to believe. But you can do a 3-day training course and know so much about how to make someone or facilitate someone towards health. But it takes 7 years to go to medical school and learn about disease, right? And I'm not saying that the medical training is obsolete or is unhelpful. It's just that disease is a massive topic, and of course health is too. But the there's a lot of simplicity there. And the challenge then is like, well, what is right? So what is eat right? What is think right? What is drink right, etc. And of course, that's what we go into in the training. But obviously, Jator, you are the past master at teaching all this stuff. So do you want to tell us about how you got into the actual teaching? Because obviously, like we said, when we met, it was on the Czech level 3. So then you had another level of training to go there and then go into your teaching. So in the interim, you're working with JP as well, right?
Yeah, I was working with JP, and that, like I stated, kind of sprouted that friendship. And then JP at the time, I think I went to his first class that he ever taught, his own work.
Right.
And I remember sitting in that class, and I was thinking, I don't know what the hell he's talking about, but I'm fascinated. And it felt a very strong pull to maybe my heart and my mind. And so I continued to go to JP's classes, and then our friendship started to grow into him coming to San Francisco and doing classes there. And
right.
And then I thought, going through some of his classes, starting to really look at underlying fears and underlying shame, and also underlying kind of sense of not enough. And then that really sparked the thought of, wow, what might be one of my greatest challenges, at least in that moment. And one of my greatest challenges was public speaking.
Right.
And so I thought, well, what's the best way to challenge that? Well, let me see if I can become a Czech faculty member.
Yeah.
JP's a friend of mine. He was on Czech faculty, and Rob Yang's a friend of mine. He was on Czech faculty, and Janet's a friend of mine. And so that was all very attractive to be able to work and hang out more often. And going through that process, I remember my first class was in San Francisco, and I was extremely nervous, at least in part. And the slideshow broke down. The slide itself, the slide projector broke. And there was, the people couldn't get into class because there's something going on at the front desk. And I mean, it was a complete and utter meltdown of every possible thing that could go wrong. Went wrong on my first morning of my first class. And I think luckily enough, I have a lot of what I've learned from the Czech teachings and JP and John and all of those things I kind of use to feel all of those feelings, feel all of those emotions, and actually to turn all of that around into not discount it or to push it away, interestingly. But to use it as food for the class. And I literally started that class off speaking about how I was feeling and what emotions were coming up right now in that class as that was happening. And it something in that moment, I think, sparked deeply my teaching style, and also my sharing style, and where I am today as a practitioner, as a teacher, as a human being. And there was a tremendous amount of vulnerability in that moment for me that class then turned into this amazingly heartfelt and open and sharing classroom. And I thought, I caught that somehow, and I caught, this might be a tool.
Because this is why, I mean, we just had a quick chat beforehand, didn't we? But it's something that I've observed of you across the years, is that you have this kind of radical honesty. You know, you're totally straight and open about. So rather than paying lip service and someone says, "Hi, how are you doing?" You know, and you saying, "Oh yeah, I'm fine, everything's good." You're kind of like, "Well, you know, actually today has been a bit shit," you know, or whatever it is, you know, or I'm having a challenge with this. And you know, it's not like you're being negative; you're just being straight. And I think somehow, also, I see a lot of your social media posts, and you're really talking about deep stuff that's affected you. And I think people respond really well to that, don't they? That's certainly, that sounds like it's been your experience.
Yeah, I appreciate that reflection. It's
Mm.
it honestly means a lot to me. It
Mm.
is very. I'm going to be very honest. Once again, it's very challenging inside of here. When I say inside of here, I mean inside of me. And
Mm.
of course, I have joy and excitement and purpose and pleasure
Mm.
and the moments of huge smiles on my face. And I also have these other sides that are dark and scary and painful and rage and the whole spectrum of human emotion I find
Mm.
inside of myself. And I think one of the gifts that I have is I've learned over time that keeping those things to myself, whether it's in an intimate relationship or a family relationship or a friendship, I've
Mm.
learned over time that hiding that feels like a burden. It feels
Yeah.
painful, and so being on social media now, or being in front of classes, or
Mm.
teaching my own classes, what I've learned in those environments is that when we're surrounded by many other human beings, for me, the vulnerability and intimacy can go through the roof if
Mhm.
you're willing to open that up, and if you're willing to open that up in front of others. I guess
Mm.
maybe at first maybe one other, and then as you become more comfortable with the process, in front of many others, and then now on a global stage,
Yeah. Yeah.
it literally helps me dissolve the power that those secrets
Mhm.
hold inside of me. And when I say the power, I mean the drain that they take on, interestingly, on my physiology, on my energy, on my emotion, on my heart, on my body.
Mm.
And so through noticing the polar opposite experience, the levity that I experience through sharing the aspects of me that I want to hide the most.
Yeah.
And I want to be really clear when I'm saying this. I'm not promoting that everyone go do this, right? This is,
Mhm.
for me, this takes time, and it took me time to get to that place. And
Mm.
you can cause a tremendous amount of disruption in your life
Sure. Sure.
if you just jump into this full board. I'm not saying that disruption will be bad. I'm just saying that it's going to be something to handle.
Mhm.
And for me, and where I am at today, I I feel a sense of heaviness if I'm not being as raw and authentic as I can consciously. Of course, there's subconscious agenda that I can't tap into, and
Mm.
is playing in the background. But from a conscious place, yeah, as much as I can, to be kind to myself, to be respectful to myself, to be honest with myself, and to be upfront with myself. The changes that I've experienced in my life, from a relationship level to a
Mm.
physical level to a business. I'm doing air or bunny quotes or air quotes right now.
Yeah.
Success. Success. Bunny ears is what I was going to say.
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
success. Success quotes. Um, it's been profound, Matt,
Mm.
and who I've experienced myself to become as a human being over the years is 180-degree change from who
Mm.
I was. And I'm not saying that who I was bad or not good. I'm simply saying that the behaviors that I was kind of implementing at different points in my life were causative of, yeah, lots of pain. And at some point I had to ask myself a question, which was, is this still serving who you think you want to be?
Right.
And sometimes those behaviors came back as, it's still, and I'm gonna still roll with them. And then at other times, they came back with, it's time to change this. And
Right.
and even our family often are sometimes our biggest challenges, and also our biggest gifts. And I was talking with my mom last night, and she's seen me go through this whole process and had her experience of me. And she's also had her experience of me becoming a health Jesus and self-righteous and arrogant. And I'll be really honest right now, as many Czech practitioners do. And then last night she said, over the last 5 or 6 years, I've noticed this tremendous softness that's come over you, and how you express things. And that came from this thought jumped in last night. From the more proving and defended you need to be, my perspective is the more insecure you actually feel.
Right. Yes. Yeah.
And you're hiding that insecurity with, I know, and this is the way. And also with the desire and need to prove and defend that you are right. And what I've noticed over the years maybe my insecurities have lessened due to being extremely vulnerable. And maybe now when I bump up against a different opinion or a different value or a different way of being or a different thought or a different, as you know, research paper or whatever it is, I'm much more curious about it than I am self-righteous about it. And for me, that's a sign that my insecurities have actually lessened. And
definitely.
And that's cool for me.
Because there's quite an interesting balance there, isn't there, between vulnerability and self-esteem? Because you might think that being vulnerable means you have poor self-esteem, but in a way, this is a kind of empowered vulnerability, isn't it? It's actually because you have self-esteem, you're allowing yourself to be vulnerable. So that's quite an interesting kind of almost a paradox, isn't it? Because when you say the word vulnerable, that person looks vulnerable. You kind of think they look like they could be picked on. They look like they are in danger, maybe, or that they're in for a rough time. But this is almost switching it around to empower yourself as an individual. How do you see the dynamics of that kind of unfolding in your experience?
Wow, I love that perspective. That's really cool. For me, what I've noticed is that same kind of thought processes for a lot of my clients and a lot of people, even on social media. It's what I notice is, and again, this is my perspective and my experience of it, is that there still is that kind of dynamic hold on vulnerability being weakness. And and social media, from my perspective, it shows up amazingly blatantly. And what I mean by that is, so far my experience of most social media, especially people who are more known, a lot of what's shared is not struggle, is not pain, is not as an example, how often do you see a post with maybe a couple and they're legitimately crying or yelling at each other, and then there's a post about what we learned through our fight? It's always, we're holding hands and skipping, and we're at Disneyland, and our life is so perfect, and I make 6 figures. And for me, that is a tremendous mask that many of us wear all the time. And social media is a place where it accentuates.
Mm.
There's a fear in my business if I am the teacher, or I am the guru, or I am the leader, I can't show that my life isn't a struggle or is a struggle. I can't show that sometimes I worry about, the next month, and or am I going to have the same amount of clients the next month? Or I can't
Yeah.
show that because for me, there's a trick that our ego plays on us, which is, that is coming from a place of fear, and we're afraid that if we expose ourselves, people won't want to work with us or follow us or pay us money. And why would I pay this person money if they're just as struggling as I am? And
Yeah.
and for me, I found so much freedom, and my business has exploded from, I think, from this place of being authentic with, I do have struggles, and there are parts of me that are worried and rageful and ashamed, and yeah, I make really good money, and that's cool. But there's also a part of me that, on the flip side of that, often wonders, how do I sustain that? When's it
Yeah.
going to end? Is it going to end?
Mm-hmm.
And I find a lot of freedom in that expression, and also a lot of compassion in that expression. Compassion for myself, because in my opinion, if I was on social media only sharing what I thought was good or positive experiences in my life, for me, I would be discounting parts of myself. I would be discounting other
Yeah.
truths. I would be
Right.
discounting, and I'm going to, in a very literal way, I would be discounting other parts of Jator that need to be expressed. And I think for me, that discounting of self is one of the biggest blocks to financial gain, to intimate, like real intimate partnership, long lasting career, health and wellness, being in a body that is essentially pain free. I think a lot of our pain, and how we experience our pain, comes from this incessant need that the ego has to wear masks to feel some sense of control, and to protect itself. And I think that's an illusion. And for me, going at it the other way now, maybe for the last 12 years or so, I have found a tremendous amount of freedom and change in my life through empowering myself through being vulnerable and finding, from what you said in that piece of vulnerability, we can look at as weakness. Let's just say vulnerability could be in this dark side, this shadowy side. And what I've found by going into those things that I deem as dark or shadowy or scary, I've found my greatest light.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that you said a moment ago, which reminded me of a quote from David White. I'm trying to think how you phrased it, but the quote from David White is that every courageous life is lived out in the grit and dirt of existence. And I think that's so easy. It was when we were talking about sort of the social media and Facebook kind of Disney World version that we see, and that is almost it is a disease in the sense that it creates dis-ease for people, because we look at that and go, oh well, they're doing well, or they seem to be having a good time. And what is important to remember is that even those people that really are doing well and really are by whatever standards that we set as doing well with the rabbit ears, then those courageous or heroic lives that we see are still being lived out in the grit and dirt of existence. But it's just we don't see that because that's buried and kept hidden under the swept under the rug or whatever. So yeah, that's.
Can I say something?
Well, go for it. Yeah.
On that note, I think for me, it's important to state that yes, social media is kind of this accentuate expression because it's so big and there's so many people expressing on there. And let's say that's the more macro, and at the more micro, that's happening every day within ourselves, in our relationships. The way social media for me is just a blatant picture of this. And it's also happening in our homes. It's happening at school. I mean, we just passed the Christmas and New Year's, and my perspective is one of the reasons that so many people have such struggle around, let's just say Christmas, for an example, is not so much the typical stories that we hear. I got to go to my parents, I got to get this and that. Okay, those are all parts of it. But one of the underlying stories to why that's so painful for so many people is those environments in which we go into, let's say going to a family member's house that we don't really like, and we don't really like our family, etc. And we go into those environments, most people shut down that truth. So that time of year could represent for a lot of people, it's time to put on an extra thick mask and hide myself even more and give my ass away even more and not be true to who I really think I am and not be true to my values. And man, I'm going to bump against all of these other people's values, and I don't know how to represent myself within those places. So I got to hide even deeper, and this just builds more and more stress. And so you see people, interestingly enough, from a research perspective, you see, at least in the United States, at this time of year, I believe it's Thanksgiving to New Year's Day, as a general theme, most people gain most of their body fat at that time of year. I find that fascinating, that it might not just be about people are eating and drinking more. Okay, true. But maybe it's also about people are eating and drinking more because they're in such tremendous pain in the environments in which they find themselves or allow themselves to be in without representing who they really are. And so they have to eat and drink to absorb or to deflect from the amount of pain that they're feeling in those environments instead of expressing it. Yeah. And that speaks back to this piece for me, which is, I've had that experience. And over the years now, people that have interestingly remained in my life because I've had to cut off a lot of fat.
Right. Yeah.
People who have remained in my life and choose to accept how I show up and choose to be my friend or a partnership with me or an intimate relationship with me. Those people know that I am going to be upfront, I'm going to be real, and I'm going to be myself and be true to what feels like my values in those moments. And I will say, when I say cut off the fat, that's not a criticism to people who are not in my life anymore. It's simply that I couldn't carry that around anymore, not them, but I couldn't carry around my own self-burden of being who I think I need to be around these people. Can you imagine the amount of tension and pain that most people are in, walking on eggshells in every environment they step into?
Yeah. It ties in a bit with what I've heard Paul talk about in the past, where I know you're using a mix of metaphor and kind of I guess reality when you're talking about fat and people putting on weight, but also cutting the fat and cutting the the sort of challenges.
Double entendre, man.
Yeah, exactly. One of those. But Paul talks about this idea of a barrier dysfunction in people that either put on excessive muscle or put on excessive weight, and the idea being that you're trying to create a greater barrier between you and the outside world, or you and other people, and that's a physical manifestation of an emotional or psychological challenge that people are facing. Is that can you speak to that at all?
Yeah, excuse me.
Mm.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that being one of the threads. It's what's so fascinating to me about any of these topics is that if that was a sweater, that's one potential thread of that sweater. And for me, putting on body fat as a way to protect myself from what I perceive to be the outside world, makes sense. Or putting on a tremendous amount of musculature to protect myself from what I perceive to be the outside world. Yeah, that makes sense. What is fascinating to me around a lot of these topics is, from a human being's perspective, at least my own, it seems like we're protecting ourselves from the outside world. I'm creating a barrier from myself and the outside world by carrying excess body fat or lots of muscle, or in the Bay Area we say looking hard, so like having that mean mug, don't F with me kind of look. The fascinating thing for me is, that is an illusion. The illusion is we're protecting ourselves from the outside world. That's kind of one level of it. Let's scrape that a little deeper. What if we're protecting ourselves from the inside world? What if that extra fat or that extra muscle or that mean mug is actually an expression of us doing the same thing internally? And interestingly, protecting ourselves from ourselves. What if we're creating a barrier from ourselves? And the illusion is it's the outside world I'm trying to protect myself from. But for me,
exactly.
The truth is it's the opposite of vulnerability and intimacy, because we're creating a disruption or a block to our inside world and pushing away aspects of self. And that is, for me, that is where the root, one of the main roots or what main threads of this sweater is, as far as I'm aware, one of the most frightening and deeply fearful aspects of a human being for most of us is intimacy. And if you break that word down, into me I see. And many of us, from my perspective, walk around with the illusion that, I'm protecting myself from the outside world. I don't make money because this, that, and the other. The kind of projection of responsibility to the external environment, not being fully self-responsible. And for me, being fully self-responsible is taking ownership of what's going on the inside is what I project outwardly. And it's also what I manifest on my physical body. It's also how I show up in a relationship. It's also how I communicate. If you look at these protective mechanisms, if you look at how you communicate when you're most negatively emotionally charged, I'm doing the air quotes again, negative. If you look at your communication in that space with the outside world, significant other or business partnership or whatever, that expression, or how you express or how you criticize or how you negatively judge or how you come to that conversation, is exactly the way that you talk to yourself in your head. We just don't notice it as often. Right. And it's such a powerful way to learn about yourself, is to notice how you interact with yourself about what the outside world represents to you. And so
Yeah.
back to what Paul was saying, I completely agree. These barriers that we create from ourselves that show up and look like barriers that we create with the outside world.
It's interesting. A lot of the language that we're using, I'm quite familiar with, having been in this field for a while. But I remember one of the first times I was exposed to this kind of way of thinking was reading The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And Tolle, I think is how you pronounce it. He, I'm not sure. I'm not sure.
Not either.
yeah. But anyway, so
I just call him E.T.
E.T. Perfect. He tells the whole story of when he was in his 20s and was feeling very, very low and suicidal. And, he realized, he was thinking to himself, like, I can't live with myself anymore, And that very phrase made him think, hang on a second, if I can't live with myself, then there's two of me. There's the I that's observing, and then there's the self, right? And I thought, and this was the first sort of exposure that I had to that kind of way of thinking. You've got this almost higher consciousness, or some people might call that the soul consciousness. There's lots of different terminologies for it that I think different traditions and different thinkers have used, but there's that higher observer, and then there's the person that's kind of caught in the show, as it were. And it seems to me that what we're talking here about is, when we're referring to the ego, we're often talking about the person that's caught in the show, in the drama of life. And sometimes to be able to step back or to step outside of that can be beneficial. And with the whole sort of border barrier issue that we've been talking about in terms of potentially putting on weight or putting on muscle mass, that kind of thing, that almost is an exact kind of reflection of the whole notion of the ego and individuation, because it is your border, your barrier, which keeps you distinct and discernible from everything else. So again, just kind of wondering if that resonates with what you're saying, and hopefully also if it provides some clarity to listeners that aren't so familiar with this idea of talking about parts of the self, or like a kind of ego self versus perhaps some other level of observation.
Yeah. I think first piece is, I love aliens, so E.T. is always welcome.
Yes, absolutely.
And yeah, I think that on that note, what I started to notice, and this was, I was 25 years old, and I started to do, my dad's been into Vipassana meditation since I was, I think, 12 years old. And
right.
I went to some Vipassana 10-day sits starting when I was about 24. And
wow.
And I was at one, I came home and kind of inserting myself back into this matrix. And I was walking into the closet, and I had a walk-in closet, and I said, what are we?
That's a good job.
Yeah, you like that? I said, in my mind or in my head, I said, what are we going to wear today? And I completely froze in my tracks. And I thought, what the hell? Who is we?
Yeah. You're like Gollum.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a seed. Nothing really sprouted other than the seed was planted. And as I started to learn the language of a part of me, or parts of self, it really started to open up my awareness to the perspective of, in any given moment, in any given decision, I typically am feeling a sense of many different perspectives. I'll give you a very easy example. I have a lot of respect for what you represent to me. And I think that
Thank you.
You're somebody that if I had some challenges on some certain topics, you would be someone, there's not many people that I would reach out to. You would be someone that I would reach out to. And so what's fascinating to me about that perspective is, before we jump on the podcast, a part of me felt a little apprehensive. A part of me felt, will I be enough for Matt's podcast? A part of me felt, will I know enough? A part of me felt fear. A part of me felt a sense of shame. A part of me also felt on the flip side of that, yeah, you'll get on and knock it out of the park. And the reason why I bring that up is because for me, that happens in shades of gray all the time. So in other podcasts, let's say that I've been on, and let's just say that I don't know the person, or let's just say I don't have them up on a pedestal in some regard or another. My anxiety level is going to be much less for those parts of me, or my fear is going to be much less for those parts of me. So as I start to notice this ebb and flow happening inside of me with many different perspectives, it actually became extremely helpful to my navigation of myself, my navigation of communication, and my understanding of myself. And interestingly, it accentuated the amount of compassion that I had toward myself, because from my perspective, what is happening as I start to speak like that or notice that, even if it's in my head or outwardly, it's acknowledging that there's a lot going on inside of me rather than discounting that a lot's going on inside of me. And back to the original starting of this kind of topic that we jumped into, it's literally being intimate and vulnerable with myself, which is scary AF. And as I've dove into that more and more and more and more and more, and lots of practice, right? Practice is I think a beautiful notion that's completely underrated, but practice, real-time experience and practice of doing it, not just learning the theoretical models of it or the teachings or the philosophy, putting it into practice and trying it and experiencing it. And there has been this huge sense of relief over my my entire consciousness. And so, yes, that language, and I think that perspective, I love how human beings, I love this about human beings, and it's also slightly triggering to me about human beings, is the idea of consciousness, or the idea of the ego and ego parts and parts of self, and all of that cool stuff. I find it so fascinating how we need to compartmentalize it. And for me, it's another trick. It's almost, we need to compartmentalize it so we can understand it, so we can perceive that we control it. And because we understand it, we can control it, so we feel less stress about it, because the ego feels stressed when we're not in control. And I'm such a fan of mystery, and I'm such a fan of, as you and I have chatted about before, of contextual understanding. And when I look at contextual understanding and start to consider, I'll never know everything on this topic. That changes the context too. And it changes things from the perspective of this is a knowing into this is a theory, which then helps me be more open to always considering new perspective and change in what I'm experiencing, and being less defended as a human being, and moving into a place of, for me, more of a childlike perspective of imagination and curiosity and fascination. And it's why I can walk into a room and, in quotes, teach a class, and there can be all kinds of challenges that happen in that environment. And I don't need to prove and defend and protect because of that. Back to this insecurity thing has been lessened. I can hear, acknowledge, and understand that that is a different person's experience. And maybe that person's experience is true. And maybe even that truth is actually showing up in their physiology. And if we did objective tests, we could look at nutrition, vegan versus carnivorous diet, and everyone's to argue about it. And okay, so we're all arguing about who's right. And at the end of the day, for me, what's fascinating is this contextualization of ideas is that if this person is having that experience, even if that experience goes against all of the research, and then that is actually showing up in their physiology, I don't understand the argument. I just don't understand it.
Yeah, for sure.
For me, there's nothing. There's nothing here to argue about. There's things to be explored together. And as you know very well, are we asking the right questions as part of context? And our questions are always based on what we currently know.
Yeah.
And
it's really interesting. One of the... Go on.
No, go.
Well, all I was going to say is that one of the fields that I've been particularly interested in over the last couple of years is looking at persistent pain and all the sort of pain neuroscience that's coming out. And I think it's a really intriguing rabbit hole to dive down. But one of the things that I saw just recently was a paper which was talking about how uncertainty is such a big driver for people with persistent pain, and it makes you think, well, okay, so is the answer to that to give them more certainty, which is, from what you were just saying, is probably not the case. It's probably more the case that they need to, I say need to, I have to be careful about my language, but it might be more helpful to them to actually become more comfortable with uncertainty and to have less resistance to uncertainty. And perhaps it's that resistance to the uncertainty that keeps the tension in the system and keeps the sensitization of the nervous system higher because of that sense of vulnerability and threat. Maybe we need to get more comfortable with the idea that we can cope in spite of the vulnerability and in spite of the threat.
Well said. I love that. For me, it's dead on. And I think also kind of another kind of side note or branch off of that is maybe for some people, when they're in that uncertainty place, maybe kind of like, corrective exercise, maybe there is a place to create some more certainty and then to then move into learning how to navigate uncertainty. Because, when we look at the idea of balance and that being a dynamic state, there's different ways to dynamically balance at different moments. So someone like me who experiences, at least for the most part, some comfort with discomfort, or I know that my life is unpredictably predictable. I might need a different balance than someone who's already in extreme uncertainty and fear about that. They may need some safety, some bridges to create some certainty to then allow the space to create consciousness or awareness or safety around the uncertainty. And we look at the threats or what causes a human being a tremendous amount of stress as a general theme is the novelty of event, the unpredictability of the event, the threat to body or ego, and a sense of loss of control.
Yeah.
And those all speak to exactly what you were saying around this uncertainty. And it's also why, in my perspective, why so many of us, inclusive of myself, are control freaks around everything. Because that that helps us have this illusion that we're in control, and that helps us feel more certain in the uncertain environment.
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
And for me, I'm really sitting and cultivating and watering this perspective of, wow, how do I continue to notice that my next breath isn't guaranteed, my next heartbeat isn't guaranteed, my tomorrow isn't guaranteed, that what is guaranteed, as far as I can tell, is I'm on this podcast with you at this moment. And can I allow the grandeur and the beauty of that moment to really sink in and enjoy it, as well as feel all of the feelings and emotions that come with it, and to slowly practice getting myself comfortable with the idea that I'm not in control. And so two of the things that I kind of keep in my mind when I wake up, I do my best to do this. It often slips my mind until I remember to say it, just like I'm remembering it right now, is I try to start my day with a thought, which is, can I notice what I typically don't notice? And the other thought that seems a little bit easier to kind of keep around in my back pocket is, may the universe surprise me. And if I can prepare myself for surprise, I'm going to be surprised today. Interestingly, I'm less surprised when the uncertainty shows up.
Right.
Like, oh yeah, I'm more prepared that there's going to be surprises today. Thank you, Jator, for reminding yourself that you're going to have surprises.
It feels a little bit like when I'm talking about time and time perspective, I always try to explain that there's a yin and a yang to time management, and the yang is what we know of time management, which is the idea that you plan your day. It's very sequential, linear in the diary, doing this at this time, that at that time, and then there's the surprises, right, which come up, and that's the yin. That's the yin of time management, which is that you have to have the fluidity and the flexibility to go with the flow, to roll with the punches, be like water, and to adjust to these challenges that come in. I think if you're too yang with your time management, it is setting you up for, heart attack or massive stress in your life. Let's put it that way. The high blood pressure and all that. But if you can have the balance of the yin and the yang, then you can both get stuff done, but be flexible and ready to essentially roll with the punches when you need to do that.
Yeah, I love that. I think I really love the concept of the yin and yang. And I think what came up for me while you were sharing, kind of in that same housing, is you said it earlier, the observer aspect of self, or what flows through us, or higher self, etc., and the participant. And so for me, maybe the observer is the more yin aspect, and the participant is the more yang aspect. And and to allow ourselves both. And that feels very important to me as I've gone through my journey. Is I know that I found this place at a point where I deeply got into this, the observer, and I'm not my feelings, I'm not my body, I'm not this, I'm not that. And I appreciate that perspective, and I get it. And what I noticed through it, though, is I started to actually discount the participant of life. I started to discount my feelings. I started to discount my emotions. I started to discount my sensations. I started to discount my body. And for me, I don't think that I would have the awareness of both unless the design team designed me to have it. And I want to be able to cultivate a friendly relationship between my observer, as well as between maybe said in another way, my humanness, my emotion and my emotional spectrum. And rather than saying they're not a part of me, for me, my language has changed to saying they're a part of me. It's not all of me, but it's a part of me. My emotions are a part of my experience. They're a part of me. My body is a part of my experience. It's a part of me. And that feels more, well, honestly, it feels softer. It feels less yang to me. It feels celebratory of I can observe and watch self and use that perspective often, and I do. And I can also participate and get deeply into, woo-wee, I'm excited right now, or I'm fired up right now, or yeah, I'm heated right now, and feel that and enjoy it rather than kind of trying to contain it or not let it be there. If it's true, and I like to question everything. If it's true that when we're not in these bodies, we are all one and all in source, and there is no relative experience. If that is true, then I am here to have a relative experience, which includes my feelings, my emotions, my sensations.
Exactly, yeah.
I'm here to do that.
To party.
Yeah. And to experience and to touch and to taste and to communicate and to pleasure and to do it right, do it all.
Yeah. Yeah, which is Osho's whole thrust of things, isn't it? Where he's kind of saying that, rather than being here to sit on a mountaintop and meditate, you're here to experience the fruits of life and the challenges of life and so on. So get out and get your hands dirty, kind of thing.
Or if you want to sit on the mountaintop and experience that, well, amen to you. That's not what I want
to do. But what you were saying there, actually, I was thinking about, because you talk about the observer and the participant, and when my father was very ill, he died from cancer back in 2006, and in that last few days when he was in a hospice and had been in a lot of pain, I went in to visit him, and I remember just hugging him, and he was kind of in and out of consciousness, and I remember saying, "Dad," and he said, "What?" And I said, "The pain that you've been experiencing." And he said, "What?" And I said, "The pain, all this pain." He said, "Yeah." And I said, it's a lesson. It's to teach you that you are not your body. The pain is in your body, and you can observe it from a different position." And he was like, "Oh yeah," and then he went back to sleep. But I didn't really go in with the intention of saying that. It just kind of came to me. It suddenly struck me as I was hugging him and just with him. And he did die shortly after that. And I do think sometimes those experiences and this idea of the pain teacher is to help people to recognize that they are not just their body and that there's another element to themselves. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think wholeheartedly agree with that too. And it's I have learned, when I ask myself this question, where have I learned more, in my pleasure or in my pain, in my suffering or in my joy? I've learned more about myself when things perceptually aren't going my way. And it brings up so much food for curiosity about self when my ego parts feel some sense of this isn't going the way that I want it to. The universe or source or great spirit or Jehovah or whatever you want to call it has a different plan than what I planned. And that brings up so many different experiences at 42. It brings up, okay, interesting. What is this moment in time that I'm experiencing in this situation? What does it represent to me? Not from a literal perspective. The literal is, I'm having this disruption in in my life.
Mm.
The more symbolic story of, what does this mean to me? What am I feeling? What emotions are here? What is this, in quotes, pain or suffering here to show me, not literally, but symbolically? And what I've often found for me is that within that symbolism, there is a tremendous amount of tie back or threads back to my past and experiences that I had maybe as a child, maybe as a teenager, different experiences in my life, that this moment is the pain of that moment or the suffering of that moment is literally inviting me to my past to help me to acknowledge, to investigate, as well as to eventually heal. And when I say heal the perception that I had of the past to help me change the lens in which I look at through today. And that, for some of us that are listening, that might sound a little confusing. So I'll give a slight story maybe that can ground it. In my partnership that I'm in right now, there's been some interesting challenges that have come up around family and breakup, and well, let's just say in some regard, not everything meeting my needs. and it's been challenging, and lucky enough, I have a partner in my life that's willing to chat about everything and be honest and raw and authentic, and challenge me, which I also appreciate. And so in one of these situations, interestingly, what came up for me through this present situation was my experience of my parents' divorce. And all of the feelings that I was having about the current day situation were being accentuated by my experience at that age when I was 7 years old. And so within that space and chatting with her, as we're talking about kind of present day challenge, also then talking about, hey, babe, yeah, wow, this is really bringing up a moment from my childhood with my parents being divorced and what that meant to me. And all of the same feelings that I had at that time, I'm noticing them flush into me now. And hey, can you remind me later today that my 7-year-old really needs my attention?
Yeah.
And then literally going back later that day and spending time with 7-year-old Jator, and as his father, not my dad that I experienced, not my mom that I experienced, but as the 42-year-old who's done a lot of self-exploration, that's worked on his communication, that has become much more compassionate and understanding, to go back with that version of me and to have deep, heartfelt acknowledgement and conversation with my 7-year-old. And what's fascinating for me about doing that type of work or play is that if my feelings about the present situation were a 9 out of 10 or a 10 out of 10 in terms of accentuate, after kind of doing this exploration and connecting with those parts, they drop down to a 2 or 3. They're still there, but they're not pushing me into this very reactive space. They're allowing me to be in this very responsive space with myself, with my parts of self, and with my partner, which is a beautiful way to create a tremendous amount of intimacy within our relationship.
Yeah, that's lovely. Great stuff. I remember Caroline Mace talking about the idea of conceptually of having sort of energy circuits in your brain, I think was the way she described it, and that you could have one energy circuit on your parents' divorce and one energy circuit on the stress at work, and but you've only got a finite number of energy circuits. And the idea, again, whether it's literal or metaphorical, that if you can address one of those energy circuits, to turn it down a little bit, or even potentially to turn it off. But what it then does is it gives you more energy and more capability to focus on the task in hand, or to direct your energies in a direction that's going to be, I guess, fulfilling and optimal for you.
Yeah.
So it sounds a little bit like that was what you're experiencing there.
Yeah, I've noticed that exact experience over the years of there's less siphoning off of energy, and there's more direction of energy. I feel I have a sense of a higher ability to direct my energy, and with it less of it being drawn off into other areas. And of course there's more branches to be explored, and each one of these branches that I explore, as that is kind of addressed, then more of that water flows down the river that I'm going down in my little rowboat.
Yeah, exactly. Row your boat.
Yeah, gently down the stream.
That's it. Because Dan Siegel's definition of mind, which I know Paul talks about a lot, and I talk about a fair bit, is this idea that it's an embodied process which regulates the flow of energy and information. And this, of course, there's a lot of background to that quote and how it was developed, but if you can just take it at face value, it really helps, I think, to understand how, when we're holding emotions in the system, or thoughts or ideas, or prejudices, that they are essentially energetic in nature. They have to be, because they're a thing. They're something that you hold, that you hold in mind, right? But the mind is, as Dan Siegel says, it's not embodied. It's not enskulled. It's embodied. So it's not just in the head. It's actually a flow of energy and information that we hold throughout the whole system, which is why, the whole system feels depressed when we're feeling down, and the whole system feels anxious when it's not just our heads that feel anxious, right? Or whatever. But again, just tying back into what you're saying. So then if mind really is an embodied process which regulates the flow of energy and information, then when we've got elements of mind, memories, experiences that perhaps aren't serving us, or are drawing energy and information away from the task at hand, then of course it's going to be of detriment to that performance or that capability at that moment in time. So it just I think we're living in quite an exciting time, really, because there's so many different thought leaders from different fields that have very similar concepts with lots of overlap. And it's a little bit like with Caroline Mess, who I just mentioned. She's talked about the idea of woundology for years. I mean, I remember her talking about that in the 90s. And the concept there, of course, is that you get a currency through telling people about your wounds. Like, I was bereaved, my parents divorced, I got divorced, someone cheated on me, I broke my leg, whatever it is. You hold that story as a kind of woundology, and you compare notes with each other, almost to show who is the most wounded. And I'm quite interested in where, again, that line is between what Caroline Mess is alluding to there as woundology being a kind of negative trait that we can all exhibit at times, versus vulnerability, because they're very close, aren't they? They're very close. Because I could walk into a room and tell you all about the tough things that I've been through, and you might tell me some tough stuff you've been through, and I try and up your game slightly by telling you another thing that I've been involved in or had happen to me, and we have this it's almost like a competition. So are we being vulnerable there, or are we being, point scoring?
I love it. I mean, there's so much that you just said that I want to. I think first piece that came up for me that I think is fun to kind of give voice to is the Dan Siegel quote on the embodiment, and I love how if that's true, and this flow through the body, and you can kind of easily just ground that into some perspectives that maybe some people could buy into, which is, there's 4 things that mainly disrupt our hypothalamus, pituitary, adrenal, thyroid, gonadal axis. And one of those main things, one of the 4, is perception. And if that axis affects every cell in the body, well, then those 2 tie together beautifully. I mean, that's a perfect tie-in. I think there's the suprachiasmatic nuclei that it doesn't affect. And I think there's some other group, but outside of those cells, every cell is affected. So that is a beautiful tie-in to kind of pull that right into current research on physiology and how when that system is disruptive, that causes a potential disruption at the cellular level, as well as the genetic level, as well as the epigenetic expression, as well as the internal environment and external environment, and et cetera. So I think that's super cool. And then the Carolyn Miss piece. I love that too. It's, of course, I think for me, very simply said, there is a light and a shadow to everything for me. And can we use our wounding, interestingly, to create more wounding? Yep. Can we use our wounding to compete and compare with who's the most wounded? Yep. And for me, maybe the fine line, which interestingly is going to be held within the person in terms of their ability to see this, because I can project onto them what I see, and maybe that's true, maybe it's not. Is that if they're going into those wounded conversations with this compete and compare, let's just say, right? For me, then underlying that compete and compare, there's a level of fear and or shame. And then they're going into it, interestingly, to create more fear and shame, to solidify that story even deeper. If you go into those stories with less fear and shame, and maybe if it's driven by another emotion, which is courage, if it's going into that with the courage to look in your shadows, to find the light that you have within you, to slowly change your wounded stories, it's a very different energy.
Yeah.
And I think for the most part, as we become more skilled at observing self as well as observing others, I see this in my practice all the time. It's what I do for a living. So I can notice almost immediately the clients who are, I call it spinning their wheels of wounded behavior, regurgitating. And I'm going to say this this might be very strange. Regurgitating these stories, and they're self-hypnotized. If you can do this in person and you watch someone talk about their wounding, many people will literally check out. You know, that kind of glazed look that people get in their eye?
Yeah.
They're not present. For me, that would be a sign that person is regurgitating the story unconsciously. It's actually their subconscious mind showing up and creating more wounding and driving it deeper.
Right. Yeah.
If the person's actually present with self and then using language like, I'm noticing that I'm spinning the same story that I usually spin, and I wonder if this story is still true for me. I wonder, it hasn't changed, but can it change? I haven't changed it, but will I be able to change it? If there's consciousness around it, and you can see this, it's almost, I'm going to pick on a group real quick, and I'll probably get in trouble for it. So here we go. They're as a group of us that really enjoy external processing. We really like to put our thoughts out so we can hear ourselves, so that we can kind of figure ourselves out. And often what I notice at times with some external processors, it's more overt. This is why I'm using it. It's the expression's more overt, so it's easier to see. Is if they are external processor that gains benefit by sharing their wounding, they are always going to talk about it, and you're always going to hear about it. And it's going to be typically not a minute-long story. It's going to be a 12-minute long story where everyone checks out and is no longer paying attention.
Right, yeah.
And so that for me would be the fine line, is really observing self, back to some of this ET stuff. Observing self. Are you observing what you're actually saying? If we really talked about how often people are present, I experience myself to generally be a pretty present guy. And I would put myself in the category of I'm present maybe 0.00001% of the time. And so if you really start to observe yourself and observe when others are speaking, I find it fascinating how most people don't even know what the hell they just said. And it's been such a beautiful gift of being a coach, because it has grown a skill set within me that is hyper observant of what people's words are, voice inflection, body language, eyes looking, and what they're saying. Because I use a lot of reflection in my practice. This is what I heard you say. So I have to be tremendously present with every one of their words and be able to kind of record what they're saying. And it is a question I'll often ask to the person. What did you just hear yourself say?
Right.
And many people have no clue. And that's my clue to, okay, they're lost in that story. And it's kind of self-hypnosis. And how do we help them break out of that?
Yeah, that's fascinating, isn't it?
Super.
Really,
I mean, this is
really fascinating.
I mean, I love this stuff, man. I mean, this lights me up like a firecracker.
Yeah. Amazing. So I know you were talking about, you put a post up on Instagram and you were saying about how hidden emotional trauma can impact on genetic expression.
Yeah.
And you just did touch on that briefly, but have you got anything additional that you wanted to share there? Because I've seen stuff about your thoughts affecting telomere expression and that kind of thing, but I don't have any specific data I can recall off the top of my head. But did you have anything along those lines that you've read about or experienced?
Yeah, I have some stuff to share that I've read about, and also I think I'm no geneticist, so let's all be
me neither.
And so back to this idea that I think is extremely fascinating to me still, of perception, and perception being one of the main drivers that directly affects the HPA axis, and the other ones being blood sugar, inflammatory processes in the body, and circadian rhythm, those being kind of the four main ones. And those each are umbrellas that break down into many other, smaller details. But as the big themes, those are the big themes. And so you look at perception, and you look at, well, of course, perception affects blood sugar. That's, I guess, it's not obvious, but for those of us who understand how the physiology works, that's pretty obvious. And then, of course, perception will affect circadian rhythm and sleep, and how we go to sleep, and how we feel about sleep, and what our sleeping habits are and our sleeping environments are. Okay, so that makes sense. And then, okay, all those things stream into, when those things are out of balance, potentially we're going to have more low-grade chronic inflammation going on in the body, and that makes sense. Okay, so we have these kind of global things that are now streaming down into the body. And so then you look at this concept that I really appreciate, which is the exposome. And the exposome is a concept which it houses all non-genetic influence since the moment of conception. And that's inclusive of in utero. That's inclusive of your mother's experience, your father's experiences. That's inclusive of the birth experience, birth canal or cesarean. That's inclusive of the hospital that you were birthed in, and the bacteria and pioneer bacteria around, and on and on and on and on. And so when you look at that concept of the exposome, often I think one level kind of deeper than that I don't often hear kind of talked about, is that, so we got this exposome and it's all non-genetic influence. So part of non-genetic influence then is also back to that perception, is our perception. Because our perception can then be the driver to blood sugar and inflammation and choice and lifestyle and movement and all of the drivers in which we choose the environments in which we place ourselves. And if then we took it, one step further and we look at, all the environments we place ourselves in, and now there's a greater understanding that our underlying genetics are driven by the environment, and the environment that creates our epigenetic expression. And so our underlying genes then are influenced by the environments in which we place ourselves, inclusive of our internal environment, which is our perception of self.
Yeah.
And then you look at, it's why we can look at as a theme. Jator, cancer runs in my family, or Jator, I got the fat gene and it runs in my family, and Jator. Okay, cool. When we start to look at this perspective, and as you know, current research is, depending on what research you read, 10% of disease is in quotes genetic and 90% environmental. Okay, so we got that. And then we look at, these kind of things that show up in people's families and run through generationally. Wow. Run through generationally. What else runs through generationally? Mostly is family's values.
Yeah.
So if family values typically run through generationally because most people don't individuate, then of course you're going to see the same underlying genetic expression within those environments with the same gene pool.
Yeah, of course.
So of course you'll see it where it expresses in one family as obesity, and of course you'll see it in another family where it expresses as thyroid disease. Of course you'll see it in another family that it expresses as some autoimmune disease. I mean, that is fascinating, and part of that is driven by family values, our perception of them, and our attachment to being who we've always thought we should be within the family structure, and the fear about leaving the family structure and individuating because of what that means to the ego. I mean, that is mind-blowing shit.
It is. It's really, it's so exciting in some ways as well, isn't it? Because what you were talking about there reminds me a bit of Mark Wallden's book on core languages, called "It Didn't Start With You," and he what he's really talking about is the idea that he's not so much ascribing it to values, but he's talking about the language that a family use, which of course very much ties in ultimately with their values and their perception of life. And how that gets passed down generation to generation and then affects epigenetic expression and so on and so forth. And that there's some pretty strong science to show that, and how the epigenetic expression will affect up to 4 generations down. So there's that side to it, but also the whole family values thing is what I think is very interesting, is that the behavioral programming that we get as young children occurs primarily, of course it occurs throughout life, but we are at our most influenceable in that first 7 or so years, 6 or 7 years of life, where we're very much in this theta and delta brainwave states. A lot of the times we're in this hypnagogic trance, essentially. And so, what I find fascinating about that is that, first up, if you were to look to Ayurveda and principles of, what is it called? I'm trying to think what Madame Blavatsky called her system. But essentially looking at the energetics and the idea of learning about different life aspects in 7-year blocks. So this idea of septenaries. And so the first 7 years is really about tribe and family and so on and so forth. And so essentially the tribe's mind at that stage of your life is your mind. You don't have a mind of your own yet, right? You're still developing your own mind. And so the tribe's mind is essentially filtering in to become your mind unconsciously, largely because you're in this hypnagogic state most of the time. And then, of course, you start to move beyond that into your second septenary, where different elements of consciousness come online, and you start to be able to rationalize a little bit and to actually question whether some of the stuff that you were taught was accurate, and to see if it fits with your life experience. But the interesting thing is that, of course, that's only the conscious part of your mind that can do that. And the conscious part of your mind is such a small component of your overall functioning, right? It's like, again, the research says somewhere between 8 and 1% of your overall cognitive function is conscious, and the rest is unconscious. So you've got somewhere between 92 and 99% that is just replaying those patterns that your tribe engendered into you in those first 7 years. So isn't that just all so fascinating?
I mean, Matt, you and I talk often behind the scenes, and when we have the conversations, I mean, this is like I'm sexually turned on right now, Matt.
Oh, I mean, goodness gracious.
No, but I mean, like, that's the amount of like juice that I have right now. It's so, it's so beautiful, and it's so cool, and it's so fascinating, and it's so mysterious, and it's I am a big fan of James Hollis's work, and I think he's a deep cat in my experience, and his take on the subconscious and the conscious mind is, he essentially says that your conscious mind is like an Italian cookie wafer. And your unconscious mind is the entire ocean on the planet. And that like puts it into perspective, man. And it creates so much exploration then for me. I don't see that as I think maybe a lot of people might experience that as this uncertainty thing. And maybe I've created or worked on getting comfortable with uncertainty. That sounds amazingly fun to me. That sounds, what you mean? I have this whole ocean inside of me to go and explore and to question, and that there's no end to it. There's no end. There's no line to cross. It means that I can learn in every single moment of my life, inclusive of these moments right now, or at the grocery store, checking out, and that I have opportunity to learn and experience so many things and to find so many hidden threads. I feel like I'm a treasure hunter, and that's become, I think many people find hobbies. My hobby is exploring all of that, because I'm not sailing the seas. Maybe I'm sailing the seas inside of me, because I want to be a first person that comes up is like a Christopher Columbus, minus going and killing everybody. Minus that, I want to go and explore my inner world, and it's endless. And so I think, back to this idea of genetics and epigenetics and physiology and how that expresses in the body, and the embodiment from Dan Siegel. And when we don't explore that, I think that's where a lot of our pain is. because then a lot of that subconscious programming is unconsciously regurgitating in our lives. And I heard a beautiful quote. I don't remember who said it, but it has been such a poignant reminder to why I explore myself, which is, if you want to know your future, all you have to do is look to your past, because your past will recycle itself without conscious intervention. So unless you're willing to look into that sea of unconsciousness and start to look at and find and play with, what are the drivers of my behavior? Where did I learn this? What does this symbolize to me? Why do I do this? Why am I afraid in these situations? Why do I hide myself around my family? Why do I get triggered around Christmas? Why am I always in emotionally destructive relationships? Why am I always?
Yeah.
If you can start to search into that, then you're freeing yourself from your own cages that you have co-created over the years, all the way back to, like you were saying, 0 to 7. And super curious to consider how much of this is also energetic programming in utero, and absorbing our mom's energy, our father's energy, and what they were experiencing at those times. And there's just so much to be explored. And I think if you this is interesting for me, if you don't want to explore because you want to remain naive, then you won't. And for me, if you want to explore because you want to find your innocence, then you're free. And naivety for me represents some moment in your life where you were exploring and you got shamed for it. And then you said, nope, I never want to look again, inclusive of looking inside. And innocence for me is, I'll keep exploring. And I'll get hurt. And I'll get scared. And I'll keep doing it. But naivety is like, I'm never going back there again. So one of our greatest blocks that I've seen within my clients and within myself is noticing and questioning and guessing into, when did I first feel a sense of fear and or shame about exploring and imagination and curiosity and playfulness? If you can find those keys will help open you up out of naivety and back into innocence to start to dive into your ocean with courage, rather than accentuating more shame and fear.
Yeah. And so I guess people can, because obviously we're talking in some ways at quite a high level, not giving the detail of how people can actually do this, but this is what you go into in your coaching and also presumably in your courses as well. Is that right?
Yeah. So we're talking like it's me and you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And there's steps, there's methodology, there's things to be done. But one of the main things I think that's often, I think, is shared quite frequently, and what I noticed with the rational mind is immediately like, what's next is allowing yourself to sit in some of these places, ask some of these questions, and see what comes in, and allow that to grow your sense of awareness of self. And as you're growing your sense of awareness, the feelings, the emotions, and sensations, rather than moving through those and looking to what's next, my invitation to more of us is to allow yourself to really sit and feel, and really let yourself feel what comes up with your new awarenesses, what emotions come up, what body sensations come up. I mean, if we went around, you and I, on the streets here in Denmark or in the UK, and we stopped people and said, when's the last time you let yourself just really feel your sadness? I mean, most people are like, I don't, not today, I'm too busy.
Yeah.
When's the last time you really let yourself feel your anger? And I don't mean like taking it, going out and, taking out. I mean like just sitting and just allowing yourself to be with it. We're going to get probably less than 1% of the population saying, oh yeah, I'm deeply into letting myself and allowing myself to feel on a daily basis. And I think that's something that's really missed and is such a big key to our kind of compassionate process to self that is often overlooked. Before, as I use myself as an example before getting on this podcast, I'm feeling some sense of anxiousness. And I just sat, and I didn't go and meditate. And I just said, you know what, I'm going to sit here and feel what it's like to be anxious, not as a bad or a good thing. I'm just, wow. And close my eyes and let myself feel that. And then I thought, wow, how old do I feel right now? And then all kinds of thoughts and ideas and perspectives started to sprout up. And it was really helpful then, because then I found this beautiful age of 7. And I said, before you and I hopped on, I said to my 7-year-old, as Jator, 42-year-old Jator today, I said, you're okay. And it's okay that you feel anxious. And I'm here to protect you. And let's do this together.
Yeah.
For me, that's extremely powerful healing stuff, man.
Definitely. Fantastic stuff. And we're getting on for the 2-hour mark now, so I know we probably can't keep going for too much longer, but you haven't just done your work with JP, and you mentioned John, and I assume you're referring to John McMullen there. Is that right?
Yeah.
And obviously, you mentioned James Hollis and studying his work. I don't know if that's formal or informal, but yeah, I agree that guy is amazing. It's fantastic. But you've also spent a lot of time with Chris Kresser as well. So you've done a lot of training with Chris Kresser, which is a different kind of string to your bow. But I imagine some overlap again, Yeah. So tell us briefly about that, and then I think we might have to do another one. Just
I mean, I love talking with you. It's so much fun.
Likewise.
I think, of course, my parents being huge influences, of course. Outside of my parents, my time, of course, the Czech Institute, hugely influential, and learned so much, and from all the different instructors. It's not only Paul that I've learned from.
Sure.
And the Czech Institute kind of, for me, has been this really kind of, it's like a central cog. It's a central cog that helps me kind of place things. And I've always really appreciated that. And that is a huge respect to my time there and working there and what I've learned there. I would say, if I was to sum up one lesson that stuck with me from Paul, is when I was getting ready to teach my first class, and we were chatting, and he said, just remember, Jator, that you are the farmer of yourself, that you have the experience of all of this, and that's all you need. And that has stuck with me so brightly as a huge teaching tool to really honor and respect myself and to acknowledge my perspective and my opinion, and it's okay that there's other ones, and to really just, I farmed myself, and I'm farming myself. And so I wanted to say that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Mm.
I'll get to JP last.
Mhm.
Chris Kresser. I've known Chris for maybe 12 years.
Mm.
A huge influence on me. I think, in my experience of him, I think he's probably the most up to date person that I know of
Mm.
on the
Mm.
planet in terms of current research. And I want to be really careful when I say that. A lot of people just say current research, as you know. He's exquisitely well versed in research methodology,
Right, right.
and that's his joy, as far as I'm aware, in part.
Mhm.
And something that's always struck me about Chris, outside of his, I experience him to be very humble, at least in our personal
Mm.
interaction,
Yeah, yeah.
is that because he's on a global stage and really well known and respected, I've heard him at times say I was wrong about something at the time,
Mhm.
and I've changed my opinion on it, and here's my new take.
Mhm.
For me, anyone that's willing to do that, I will be a student of that
Yes, yeah.
perspective. To me, is that's science.
Yeah, for sure.
That's
For
real
sure.
science for me.
Mm.
Not staying stuck. That we'll be laughing well, maybe we'll be dead in 50 years, but in 50 years,
We could be both laughing and dead.
yeah, we'll be laughing at it. In
Yeah,
50 years, the ideas of today will be hilarious,
yeah,
and that's so humbling and beautiful to me. So I love that.
yeah.
Uh, and then, yeah, John McMullen and Journeys of Wisdom. Um, I would say that my experience of John, as a person, as a teacher, I experience him to be one of the most profound people I've ever met in my entire life.
Mhm.
Uh, that dude is, JP and I call him the wizard,
Yeah.
and JP and I experienced JP to be exquisitely deep. Um,
Mm.
I toot my own horn. I think I'm a pretty deep cat as well, and
Mhm.
JP and I will laugh at times and look at each other and shake our head, and we'll say, "But John, though,
Yeah.
John is
It's a whole different brand of mustard.
yeah, he's a all of these guys are my friends, and he's a
Yeah,
good friend, and obviously there's some metaphoric father there for sure,
sure, sure.
and I really appreciate him
Mm.
and his perspective. I've learned a tremendous amount from him, and
What would it actually? How would you encapsulate what he does to someone who's never heard of him before?
mm,
Because he's very intuitive, isn't he? But also very well read, and I'm not actually sure what his qualifications are, or how he puts himself forwards to the world.
mm. Yeah, he has all kinds of. He's got a PhD and all kinds of other
Really? Wow.
stuff.
All right.
Um,
Wow.
and what's really fascinating to me about John and Paul is, uh, both of their backgrounds have a lot to do with electronics. I mean, they're both
Right.
in the military. They both had this background in electronics.
Yeah. Yeah.
They're both genius in their own right. I mean,
Hmm.
um, John is uh, exquisitely intuitive, like I think all human beings are.
Mm.
I think the difference between John and a lot of people, as a general theme, is John has over the years taught his ego not to feel shame and fear about how intuitive he is,
Hmm.
and so, um, yeah, his his work, really, if I was to sum it up, from my experience, is that most of our pain and struggle is driven by fear and shame, typically
Hmm.
hidden fear and shame,
Hmm.
and that our journey in part here, that healing journey in part, is to learn how to reparent ourselves. If I was to sum it up
Mm.
as concisely as I could,
Hmm. Hmm.
he's a profound cat. And then I think, lastly, JP, and I don't know that anyone else in my life has had as a great influence on me as JP has.
Yeah.
I've been friends with JP again for I think 12 years now, and first as a student, then as a friend, and then now as a brother, and most of that learning wasn't so much in classes, but it was more so in conversations like this. This is this is what JP and I always chat about. On the deepest of levels, as well as do crazy videos and have fun, crack up and act like complete 5-year-olds, which is so beautiful.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
And all of these kind of schools have really, for me, back to this kind of contextual idea, for me, it's just given me a very broad context to understand myself and understand human beings, at least to where I'm at now. And of course, to keep exploring. And, the JP and John pieces have been so helpful in kind of tying into my Chris and Paul pieces, which is when I'm in Chris and Paul-ish space, right? Nutrition and movement and change, etc. With John and JP's work, it helps me when people get stuck. I have the tools to help them explore why they're stuck. And that has been integral to my work. And then my practice has just completely changed now to, I don't do really anything physical. And I do some nutrition, etc. But most of what I do is mental and emotional exploration and working with people on what their perceived blocks are. And even the people who come to me, let's say for gut health or maybe some performance stuff, they often come with that perspective and then often leave with, wow, there's some really deep threads to underlying stuff here that are probably the drivers of why this is showing up in my life. And let's deep dive into that and do these other things. And it's so much fun for me. And I'm so humbled and so grateful that I was had the opportunity to know Paul personally, to know John personally, to know Chris personally, and to know JP personally. That is a tremendous gift. And
for sure.
I'd say lucky, but I believe in destiny. So I feel like it's a beautiful part of my destiny.
Excellent. So just the podcast is called FC2O, which is from chaos to order, and part of the objective is to. Do you need to get that, or are you good?
I'm not gonna get that. I don't know who it is.
Okay. So part of the objective of the podcast is to help the listeners to find order from the chaos of all the information that's out there, all of these kind of disparate points of view and so on, because that's part of the challenge, I believe, of this information age, is that you can find so many different opinions and so much divergent research, like you mentioned earlier about vegan versus carnivore diet, that kind of thing. So have you got any nuggets of wisdom that you might share to help people make sense of that or make order from that chaos?
It's so fascinating when you're saying that, because there's a part of me that all I want to do is make more chaos. Well, there's a part of me that's going to say, no one knows what the fuck they're talking about, so learn to listen to yourself.
That's a bit of wisdom right there, isn't it? That's a nice bit of simplicity.
I think to kind of play off that stream of thought is something that I have learned in my own journey through all of this, especially around all of this information, is if you're a person that notices and observe yourself, always searching out information, always chasing the next course, always reading the next book. My very simple invitation for many of us is to take what you have right now and allow yourself to fully experience it. That constant search for me is often driven by, back to all at the beginning, by the sense of insecurity of not being enough. And one day, if I carry enough information, my mommy and my daddy will finally see me.
Yeah.
And as we're both Czech faculty, and many people often ask me, Jator, what's your dream? And my answer for the last 2 or 3 years has been to enjoy where I'm at.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Yeah, that's great. Love that. And I resonate with much of what you said as well. In fact, I resonate with all of it. Perfect. Well, listen, Jator, thank you so much for today. I really enjoyed the chat, and like I said, we could keep going for hours, if not days. And so if people want to find out more about your work, I know your business is called We HLC, so WE and then HLC. But where do they go to find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram as Explore with Jator, YouTube, Explore with Jator, and Facebook, Jator Pierre. And I'd really love to plug my program, which is Restore 60.
Yes.
Which is a program diving into your heart, into your mind, into healing your gut and that HPA access with all of what we talked about today, with perception and nutrition and movement and really diving, before getting into nutrition, really diving into the background of what's driving you. And if you've experienced yourself to, in quotes, fail or have blocks, we dive into that first before we start diving into any information.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the point of the program. And it's really cool. We start March 16th. And there'll be more on social media about that. And
excellent.
Yeah.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put those links in the show notes so people can access those directly at mattwallden.com on the show notes section. Thanks again so much for your insights, your expertise, your vulnerability, and your love. That was beautiful.
Hey, Matt. Thank you. It's an honor to be on, and I have a lot of appreciation for you and what you bring to the world. And thank you for being my friend and my brother too.
Yeah, likewise. All right. Take care. We'll speak again soon, no doubt.
All right, brother.
Cheers, Jator. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us again here on FC2O. If you're enjoying it, please share it with anyone you think would like it. If you'd like to find out more about Jator, or indeed to explore with Jator, please head over to explorewithjator.com, where you can find out more about his online coaching packages and workshops. Next time we have my colleague Carl Todd, who is an osteopath and presenter and has worked for well over a decade at the very top level in professional sports, including being the go-to osteopath for the England men's football team. Thanks for joining us again. Hope you enjoyed listening in. See you at the next show.